All right, welcome to the X Podcast.
What?
I just wanted to try John Oliver's intro, all right? So I don't think I pulled it off. There's something about his like British accent when he does it. It just makes it just, you feel at home.
I imagined a different podcast that I've listened to where somebody does. It's kind of like that, so it's a different one.
Okay.
You sound like John Oliver.
Yeah, voice is struggling.
What's going on over there at the far end of the table?
Well,
the 6 foot COVID-friendly table.
Yes. Well, I was in Nashville this weekend for my birthday.
Oh, you got sick.
And, I think the other guys have recovered. They got kind of sick, but I got a sore throat one night, and I just also got to be honest.
You mean you got COVID?
Well, no, I do think I had that a couple months ago. But part of it, too, I have not been sleeping well. I never want to be that guy, but I had to be that guy. I went by my apartment complex yesterday and said, hey, my neighbors, like, literally are reverberating the walls and the ceilings 24/7, and I'm not sleeping as a human being, and I don't want to be a Karen. I gotta tell you. And so maybe something will be fixed. Now, I will say this. Here's what I don't think people usually do that I did do. Before I ever put in a complaint, I went up there about 3 weeks ago at midnight and knocked on the door. They say you probably shouldn't do that as a safety hazard.
Yeah.
But I don't like the idea of like people that complain behind other people's backs.
Okay.
So I just knocked on the door and said, hey,
How did that go?
I had to knock for a long time before they heard me.
Okay.
And then they came to the door, and I just said, hey, I am so sorry. Like, don't want to be that guy. Like, it's reverberating through my ceiling. Would you mind just turning down a little bit as I try to sleep? He's like, oh, okay. Kind of muttered, turn it down a little bit.
Yeah.
But it's not let up.
Oh.
And first time I've experienced this in the 6 years living there. So,
wow.
Anyways, no one listening right now cares. But
I care.
You care. You care deeply. So this is just
and
a
now
moment.
when they get a message or get confronted from the management, they will know exactly who it came from.
They probably will. I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
Because I went to them. You know, I applied Matthew 17. Went straight to them.
Matthew 18.
Is it Matthew 18?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you don't understand the pretext of 17 and what led up to that moment.
Oh,
we were off to a good start.
Yeah, we are.
So,
you
anyways,
sound amazing, but anyways,
thank you.
I hope
thank
you feel a little bit
I feel
better
raspy and mature.
Yeah.
Clint Eastwood. By the way, I just heard Kevin Costner's coming back to Yellowstone. Did you
Really?
hear that? Yes, I just heard that.
Oh.
Well, you know that he literally mortgaged his life away for that 4 installment, and the first one tanked at the movie theater. They had to push it back.
Wait, the second one was supposed to come out September 7th.
It was supposed to they had to push it back.
Oh, really?
Because the first one bombed so badly.
See, now he has learned that I need to go back to Yellowstone so that it drives the popularity so that people actually want to go see my movie.
Yes. Yeah.
That's what I think.
That's what he needs to do.
That's what I think he's doing.
That's what he needs to do.
We
We got another beautiful live audience joining us. They heard that it's episode 202, and they've come in.
I doubt that.
Okay. All right. But you had a topic that you wanted to bring to the COVID table today.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about a friend of mine, Tucker, who he just he has a really terrible habit of not responding to text messages.
Oh.
And I just thought maybe this would be a good time for us to discuss the value of being nice. I'm just kidding. Tucker's great at that. He just walked into the room. I was just kind of hoping that maybe he would be like, oh, you're talking about me. Love you, Tucker. Anyways, but I thought maybe we could, I don't know why this idea came to me other than to realize that there are some differences in the way we all view life, the way we approach life. And one of the things that I was thinking about was this concept, this idea that some people that I know tend to be, I don't want to suggest like fully trusting, but some people tend to, I think, trust easily. Mm-hmm. Let me just say it that way. Mm-hmm. They tend to trust easily. And then other people, what I would say, maybe lean toward being skeptical first. Maybe it's just like your first response reaction to news, information, stories, whatever it might be. And I started just kind of like thinking about how maybe we all are a little bit different. We're shaped by a variety of different things that kind of on the spectrum of maybe between trust and skepticism, that we find ourselves naturally inclined toward one or the other, or somewhere in the middle, but toward one or the other when it comes to life. And I just wonder how much that affects everything that we do and the way we see the world. I mean, I wonder if, like, you know, it's like somebody who is maybe naturally more trusting, maybe they hear a story and they immediately believe it. And in today's age, when you think about news and you think about cycles that happen, even in the political world, and like there's so much, even since like the last debate and other things, where it's just everybody is fact checking everybody. Nobody's facts line up. I think maybe I'm wrong. Maybe we're just getting to a point where everybody's skeptical of everything. I don't know, but it does feel like we're kind of on that trajectory a little bit. But I just feel like some people, and maybe there's some qualities that go with it. Maybe people that are more trusting tend to be more positive in life, and they're happier. And then maybe people that are more skeptical tend to be more pessimistic in life, and they see the world through a more cynical lens.
You so tend to think that I am a little bit more trusting and optimistic.
Yes, yes, it seems like that. And that's not a bad thing. I think that's a great thing. You have a very optimistic view of life, just in general. And I think people, I think maybe you, which I think is a beautiful thing to have. Your bottle is mostly full. My bottle is missing a little bit because I drank some. Holding up a bottle just to, so
you know what's
I think,
funny?
I think you come across to me as the hopeful optimist. You say that about yourself. You are.
Yeah.
And not that doesn't mean that you can't be skeptical of people and situations, things. But the question is, do we have a bent toward it? Do we have kind of like our first inclination is to want to, how about that? How do we say that? To want to trust people, to want to trust what people say, to want to trust the news report that we hear, to want to trust. Again, take all this in context with where we are in society today, where now you kind of almost don't want to trust anybody, and I don't care who it is. So anyways, it was just an idea concept, and I'm just curious your thought, if you kind of think of people in this regard, or do you think people are like this, and why?
I actually think it's a great topic, and I think both societally and personally, I think one of the things that comes top of my mind, though, just kind of like as like a preliminary like asterisk on the conversation, because I do think like trust is disintegrating. I do think we probably live in the most skeptical, cynical age ever, and but I also think, and I mentioned this before, I also think just like one little nuance I throw out is it can be easy to look at someone and say, oh, they're really trusting or they're really untrusting. I think there's a lot of selective trust out there. And I've mentioned it before politically. It's funny. It's more tragic than funny, but right now you see the memes, you see the stories, you see the posts coming out of the debates going into the election of, you know, somebody on the far right. If you're believing this and you still think blah, 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 then you're beyond hope. You've swallowed the gullible pill. And you have people on the far left saying, if you still think that blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, is it possible when you get on the extremes, you're choosing to be blindly trusting towards one to a dangerous degree and blindly untrusting? I've mentioned before, I think it's interesting, like on the far right seems to be disproportionately distrustful towards government, but disproportionately trusting towards big corporation, law enforcement. And then it's just interesting. Both sides, you know, culturally and politically seem to have selective trust of who they think should almost have blind trust and blind distrust. So I think we're all like that in a lot of ways. I think some of us, depending on whether it's philosophically or religiously or culturally, we all come at things through a filter of our personality, our backgrounds, our experiences. So I think that factors in. But then I do think you're right.
But let's pull it back to more personal.
Okay, let's pull.
You know what I mean? Not just us, but like not politically. Like let's remove that for a moment and just say like individually.
Yes. Yeah, I do think that there is a spectrum that people are on from, if you want to say pessimism to optimism. And I would admittedly be an undying optimist. I don't know if I've ever read it or brought it up. Probably my favorite kind words ever spoken to me is in 2021. I had a book come out, and one of my good friends from Lexington, we speak maybe once every few years. Ashley, I saw her recently. She posted on my page, and she said, hopefully this doesn't sound like a brag. She says, Russ is one of the few people I've ever met that it seems no matter what happens in life, there's an optimism that doesn't dim. There's like a hope for the future that never dims. There's a whatever. And I read that, and I'm like,
well, I mean, the title of your book was Hope for the Wilderness. You know, it's like most people don't like going through a wilderness. You're like, hey, this is going to be amazing.
No, but it's funny. I mentioned in the book, one of my favorite lines from any movie is in the Great Gatsby. And they were talking about Jay Gatsby, and they said he was the most hope-filled man I've ever met. And like, I've always wanted that to be said of me. But the irony is, I think I'm like more trusting towards others in the world, but people will probably be surprised at how harsh I am about me.
Yeah.
How like I'm really cynical at times about my own motives.
Yeah.
I'm really cynical and skeptical.
Well, that's because you know you.
Yes.
No, I mean, we all are like that.
Yeah, yeah.
No, I can see that. I mean, I think we're all to an extent.
And so, I think there's a lot of factors that play into it. I think certain personalities are like that. I think certain, mental constructs are like that. I don't think it's good or bad either way. I told you the other day, though, this is very simplistic for me to say as a follower of Jesus. I do think that faith should be the default as a follower of Jesus. Like, I think, my tongue, which is connected to my heart, should primarily be speaking life, primarily be speaking hope, primarily, we always quote it at weddings, but 1 Corinthians 13 says, love always trusts, love always believes, love always hopes. Like, I want that to be my first gut reaction to things, is to trust first, to believe first, to hope first. Yeah. I think there's probably...
I think that's... let me say this.
Yeah, jump in.
I think that's a great quality to have. Don't diminish it, because I think sometimes in light of our current society, we look at somebody who's like that, and I think the label we'd say is, oh, they're gullible.
Yeah.
Oh, they just trust anybody and everything. I think that's a terrible state of affairs that we've gotten to. I think that's what's so hard about culturally speaking, is that we've gotten to such a cynical level where everybody is distrusting of everybody.
You know what's interesting, though? I've seen so much research about this and heard so much research about this over the last few years, and you know what I feel like the new word is going to be, instead of I Googled it, is I AI'd it. I AI'd this before our conversation just to make sure this was true. It's funny because you tend to think, well, people that are not optimistic, they must just be more rational.
Right.
They must just think more on an intellectual level. But research actually shows the opposite. It actually shows a higher link between optimism and intelligence. And in fact, when you look at all the most of the famous geniuses, they were known as the most undying optimists. Albert Einstein, undying optimist. G.K. Chesterton. I think Earl McMahon is a great genius. You look at Simon Sinek's of the world. Bill Gates.
He's cynical.
No. Bill Gates is an undying optimist.
Sure,
And you may love these people, but there's actually a higher link between optimism and intelligence than pessimism and intelligence. And Dear AI wasn't sure on why that is. I don't know that we've really connected a link. I think, and I may have heard somebody say this before, but I think sometimes optimists are confused with fools.
Sure.
Because sometimes they think, well, an optimist must just ignore the facts.
Right.
Well, if you ignore the facts, you're not an optimist, you're a fool.
Yeah.
And I've been there before. I have to, at times there is part of me that I have to wrestle with that, like, I'm really courageous here, but not so much here. Right. You know this about me. There's things I'm like, oh, I don't want to face that, or I don't want to. And then there's other areas where I'm can be full of courage and full of hope and full of whatever. And so I deal with this inside of my own soul. But I think one of the ways I was thinking about it is a pessimist only sees problems. A realist only sees facts and mainly problems.
Mm-hmm.
A fool ignores the problems. An optimist looks at the problems, but just never accepts the problems as final. Mm-hmm. The optimist looks at the problems, but always believes, just faith for a moment, God's going to use it somehow. Mm-hmm. God's going to get me through it somehow. Mm-hmm. There's a bright side to this. God's going to get me on the other side of this. God's going to somehow use this for his glory, my good. Like there's a part of an optimist that will look at facts, but never believe they're final. And never believe they have the final word. And never believe that there's not something good inside of it.
Not much to say to that.
Sorry, I'm not trying to preach that. That's just as I think through it. That's
well, I think
okay, push back.
Well, I think that there is it's really hard when you cross over, I think, to an extent with faith.
Sure.
I want to kind of back up a little bit before that. I want to back up before a perspective that is shifted because of faith. Because I think this plays even into the world of faith. The question is, again, the dynamics, this may be more of a social construct than we realize, how much we're affected by this. In other words, I think depending on the era you grow up in, depending on, it's like if somebody were to grow up today, as our Gen Z have, or even the younger generation that's not yet marked, but is growing up today, you're probably growing up with a massive distrust of anything and everybody.
Sure.
I mean, when you kind of are like, there's nothing but everybody's saying, this media outlet's lying, this media outlet's bending, that no one does true journalism anymore. If you grew up in a different era, you might not be affected by that as much. So I think.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I think there's a lot of environmental things that kind of lead to us being like that. Personality is interesting to consider. I do think maybe if we were to try to match it up, this idea of skepticism and trust, if you were to kind of match that up, let's just say with like Enneagram. Okay. You're probably going to say a 1 and a 5 might tend to lean toward the skepticism first. Maybe a 7, maybe a 3, maybe a 2. You would think, again, just purely, and a lot of these are just massive stereotypes. And so we all are very different, and we can't be put in one box. But you would think might lean more toward the trusting and optimist type scale. Because, and this is that question about connection between a more analytical approach versus an intuitive approach. We're all different. It's the same thing as the Myers-Briggs, right? Some people, that is one of the factors in the Myers-Briggs, is the N or S, right? I think it is somebody intuitive, or is somebody more, I don't remember, what is it? Is it N or S? Is it S? I can't remember now.
I can't remember.
I think it is S. But it's they're more motivated by facts. In other words, they're going to read the facts, and then they're going to make a decision. Whereas intuitive people are more of like, they kind of quickly absorb all factors, and then they have like this, I just think, you know what I mean? They have this gut reaction. So my point is, we're all very different in how we view the world, and all the different factors, from how you were raised to the era you grew up in to the experiences that you've had from the moment you were young and little. I mean, the environment you grew up in.
Right.
You grew up in a very negative household. You grow up in a dysfunctional home. You might naturally just bend toward skepticism.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think what I was just trying to say is that I want to just peel back the layers and remove I agree with you. I think there is an element of faith. And I'll just say, I tend to be more, I don't know if the word is skeptical, but maybe it's I'm trying to say a nice word, a deep form of being really analytical has a tendency to doubt first so I guess it's the whole doubt first until there's enough information to believe versus having some information and being able to connect that to, no, I think that's right, and believing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like I don't know if that's a thing. And I guess I see this sometimes when I talk to people. We see it in ministry. We see it pastoring people. There's just some people that, man, they're God is an intellectual. There's an intellectual barrier to it. Other people, it's not an intellectual barrier to it, but it could be a personal thing or a personal experience or what somebody did that reflected God. That, you know what I mean? And so I wanted to kind of like remove faith and just go, even as people approach church or faith.
Sure.
I think people come with different, there's
do.
people that are like, there's a lot of reasoning and they need to process this from an analytical standpoint. Other people can come and just be in a state and just go,
yeah.
There's something in them that would be like, I just believe that.
Yeah, it's interesting. Somebody I'm really close with, I won't say who it is, but, I left the faith a long time ago. And they quoted this line from Sleepy Hollow, where I forget who it was that was debating or arguing in the movie, but one of the people said to the other character, said, "You are just bewitched by your reason." And the response was, "No, I'm beaten down by it." And I think there are people that feel that way.
Yeah.
Just like they feel beaten down by the reason, and everything is, what can I dissect under a microscope, and what can I fully understand? Which really is not a bad thing, but it's a form of control in a way.
Sure.
And sometimes when we feel like things are out of our control, it is easier to say, what mentally can I have a firm grasp on?
Sure.
And you feel like, everything's quicksand. And so I think it reminds kind of what you're talking about. My example would be, I love the show Lost. In the show Lost, you have Jack and you have Locke. And Locke is the person of destiny and fate. And, Jack is the neurosurgeon of science and reason. And Locke there's this big epic moment where they're fighting. And Locke is, why do you find it so hard to believe? Jack screams back, why do you find it so easy?
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
That's the dichotomy. And what's interesting is you can kind of replace this. Again, just riffing off of what I see as a gap in humanity and psychology and anthropology. And you can even apply that same kind of dichotomy to, I think, faith and science. Which is a world that I love to play in and understand and try to find convergence and understand that. But when you see, even before the scientific era, there was maybe a more trusting behavior or more trusting kind of approach that people had. And not everybody. I mean, you can go all the way back to Aristotle. There were people who they were not just philosophers, but in many ways they were scientists. Yeah. They were, and so you can go back and know that there's been differing thought on this for a long time. This is not like, the church and science and that kind of stuff. But I find that it's interesting to me how some people, the facts and the rationality of needing to understand is kind of it needs to be there first, versus maybe somebody that is more trusting. And when I say trusting, I don't mean gullible, but they could hear from a source they trust, and that's good for them.
I want to throw this out there. It just comes top to mind just as a nuance. I'm curious your thoughts, because I was listening to an interview this morning from like 3 years ago of a guy we follow. We talk about Erwin McManus when he came out with his book, Genius of Jesus. And somebody asked him, said, why do you think it is so many people struggle to believe outside of the faith that Jesus is who he said he was? And and he's I love the respect that he speaks of people outside the faith. Like, most of his friends are atheists. Like 1,000 atheists go to his church. But he said something interesting that I know does not describe everybody outside the faith. He said, I don't actually think it's that so many people struggle to believe Jesus was who he said he was, as much as it is they struggle to believe that there are people who claim to reflect Jesus that don't. And I know that's not always true. There's some people that would just say, no, I'm data-driven, and I need to see the data.
Sure.
But I do think all of us, even those of us that would say we're the most reason-driven, are affected by more emotions and things inside of us than we realize. I think a lot of it, I'm going to say it this way, I think a lot of us deciding who we trust is who we find trustworthy. And I think we trust who we resonate with. Because even as you're talking about like this breakdown of trust, the era we're in, the first thought that came to my mind is, yes, that's true. But like talking about Gen Z, for instance, Gen Z, there's a big breakdown of trust. But it's primarily with traditional models of media, traditional models of whatever. Those same people we would say aren't trusting, again, broad brush stereotype, have a TikTok influencer their age that they do trust.
Yeah. No.
So
they don't trust certain
yes
institutions and things like that.
So it goes back to a selective trust,
right?
Which means I wonder how much of our trust that we don't realize is actually way more based on resonance. The people that we find trustworthy, we choose to give trust. And let's just be honest, a lot of modern day Christianity has very little resonance of trustworthiness and authenticity. And so a lot of people, especially of a scientific persuasion, look at it and see through it and say, that's not real.
It doesn't seem
There's no
authentic. There's no substance, all that good stuff.
Because the truth is, it sounds, you study science even more than I do, way more than I do. But there are a lot of brilliant intellectual people right now that would say, the thing 30 years ago of science and faith being at odds really is not so much of a thing increasingly over the last 10 to 15 years. There's a lot of convergence. There are a lot of discoveries continuing to actually reveal the intricacies of creation and design.
Well, I'd probably tend to agree with that, but there are still plenty of people who don't. There really are. I do think that we are. So some of this maybe can be traced. When you think of a cultural narratives, you think of modernity as this period that was steeped in intellectualism and fact and information. And then I remember even when I was going to school for this, that we had been shifting as a society. And I want to say even bigger than just American society, because I think this has kind of becomes more global. I think it's as our globe shrinks because of being connected. I think what you find is instead of cultural shifts happening only with one nation, I think they kind of begin to shift around the globe at the same time. And so modernity kind of gave way to a postmodernism, right? Where we didn't just rely on the five senses and we didn't just rely on information from scientists. Because that's kind of what, if you think about it, scientists for the last about 300, 400 years have kind of ruled the airwaves as to what we consider as being real. And, materialists and all this good stuff, right? And then what started shifting, they say maybe around the 80s, 70s, 80s, 90s for sure, was this move to a postmodernism, which really, I think, opened people back up to the thought of maybe that's not all that's real. And maybe there is more that is real. And so I think there's been a real interesting curiosity that has led to what I think you're referring to, and maybe it's just more exposure, but I do believe that you see more and more, and it was probably hidden. They're probably coming out now because in the scientific world, to say that you have faith in a God, you can be shunned. University campus, whatever. You absolutely can be shunned. You can be locked out of opportunities, fellowships, all these different things. So, but I think it's becoming a little more acceptable for someone to say, no, I really do believe in the facts of science, certain things, but I also believe that it points to this. And so I don't know how much of it is like, ebbs and flows with a cultural narrative that's happening, and I do think generationally we're a little bit different. That we're all I was reading information that said that baby boomers tend to be the most trusting generation that we have.
Baby boomers. Interesting.
The one thing that created a negative impact for baby boomers was Vietnam. But before that, you got baby boomers that was this generation that really came to be after World War II. And that was honestly a time when there was the most growth in our nation. The whole idea of baby boomers are the ones that there's this boom of babies that came about after we got through, the 1920s and 30s of dealing with the Great Depression. You get through a world war, Then all of a sudden there comes back and there's a time of peace for the most part here that we're a part of. And so things just life was good. And so baby boomers tend to be very trusting. Gen Xers tend to be very skeptical and cynical. Of all generations of the last 4 or 5, they're probably the most cynical.
So let's bring this down. Sorry, anywhere else you're going with that?
Well, I think, again, my point is that there are a lot of cultural facts. There are a lot of cultural things that play into this.
Sure.
There's, what happened for Gen X? The family broke down. They were the most divorced families that came, most kids that came up, that were Gen X came up, and a lot of them started coming up in divorced families. You didn't have divorce before that. It became an accepted thing. You had Vietnam and and all the kind of resistance against the government for that. No one trusted government, didn't trust institutions, didn't trust anything. So they're some of the most cynical. So I do think there's that. The millennial generation came after that, where they were still very cynical of institution. But actually began to trust a little bit more of, almost like you said, selective trusting.
Yes.
And so I just think maybe before,
Yeah.
this is what maybe is so fascinating today, is that we've never lived in a time where there is probably there's such a selective trust that has to exist in almost everybody.
Yep.
And,
So let's bring it down to where we live. We're doing a series right now, Art of Connection, interpersonal relationships. Like on a personal level, do you feel like you're a trusting person?
like interpersonal. Yes, I think I am a pretty trusting person. I almost don't think that people are out to do harm. I don't think people are talking about me. I'm trying to think, what would somebody who's cynical about that think, you know? I don't think people are talking about me behind their back. I'm sure they are. I don't think that, well, maybe that's a cynical comment. Where are you at? Like, I don't think about it, I guess, in that regard. I think in general with people, I think I'm fairly trusting.
And I mean, I
don't know. Do you think I am? Let me ask that question. Now, do you think you are? Do you think I am? I guess maybe it depends on how you define trusting.
I think you are very...
I love how slow you are at answering.
I'm thinking through it. I think you are very trusting of... I agree. I think you're very trusting interpersonally. You extend a lot of trust. You're a very gracious leader, which I actually think is a reflection of the soul. You know, it's that German polymath Goethe said, we see in the world what we carry in our hearts. And, you know, there's some sociologists that say, and it may not always be fair, that if you view the world as untrustworthy, it could be a reflection that you're untrustworthy. And I think we always have to factor that in. That's not always the case. Look,
right.
Like you said, this is so complex.
Yeah.
Disappointment can hurt your trust. If you've been misused, abused, violated, like you've grown up with severe loss and trauma, man, that's going to leave shrapnel in your soul to like work through and find healing.
Yeah.
And so I don't want it to just, you know, be callous towards that.
Right.
But I do think like the health of our soul, what I never want to let enter into my soul is cynicism. I'll go back to that in a second. But I think you are very trusting interpersonally. I think you're slow to trust spatially, or
this is fun.
This is fun. Is this okay?
Spatially.
Does
that mean like hugging?
No. Like in new spaces or organizations.
Give me.
Is this?
Okay? I don't
okay?
say. Give me an example.
Okay, so like, can I go here?
Sure.
So like,
this is fun. This is we'll psychoanalyze ourselves on here.
I've been with you to new environments multiple times. And now part of this is Enneagram. They say there's 3 types of threes.
Yeah.
And the third type of 3 is the what is it? The protector defender. That's like looking. That's like
Sure.
So when I walk with you in new spaces,
Yeah.
a lot like you are literally one of the most incredible people I've ever met. But I watch you sometimes have to let yourself go there after you have overly observed everything and let your guard down. Like there's times like I've gone in and people are like eager to meet you and you're kind of like, yeah. And then I'll tell you about like this space. You're like, okay, yeah. I mean, yeah, okay. And I mean, you're just like, so I feel like you when it comes to, is this okay?
Yes, it's fine. I don't. You'll have to give me some specific examples at some point. No, this is great. This is fine.
So I watched that. And I think, and let's be honest, in the church world, where you and I both have been raised in spirit-filled environments, it sounds like, is this okay for me to say on the air? Like my experiences were probably a little bit more moderate and healthy than the ones you endured at times. Is that okay?
I cannot confirm nor deny.
Okay.
I don't think they were bad.
Okay.
They
because
looking back, some of them may have been a little bit more extreme.
Okay.
And not in a crazy way, but just environmentally. You know what I mean?
Sure. So I, in my personal opinion, just as knowing you, I feel like because I've been on that pendulum where I've been like, I've seen the crazy. I mean, we're going back to faith now, but like I've had to fight my way back. I feel like maybe you've had to fight your way back even more to like
for sure,
to like accept and believe there's healthy out there.
Sure.
And the more craziness you see, I think I'm gonna go back to this on a faith level.
Yeah.
I love 1 Corinthians 14.
Okay.
I think it is like the perfect balance that you see this tension of can we say a healthy skepticism?
Sure.
Of not being gullible.
Yeah.
But not being cynical. You see Paul talking about Holy Spirit, you know, supernatural workings of God and gifts of the Spirit, and you see Paul being like, "Hey, don't go crazy in an environment. Nobody's gonna buy into that." And then you say, "But I wish you all did this."
Yeah.
And then you hear him saying, "Test all the spirits. Don't be gullible. Don't be like those crazy people that go on every wind of doctrine and believe every little movement and blah blah blah." But also, don't despise prophecy. Don't quench the Spirit. Don't be quick to. So I see like this tension I want to live in, where I want to. I mean, what did Jesus say? Unless you become like a little child.
Sure.
I want to be child. I want to grow more and more childlike in heart without being childish in my thinking. Like I want to be mature and not gullible in my mind. But I think the posture I want to keep is wide-eyed and wide-armed in my heart to believe the big things of God and to trust first. I heard Henry Seeley at the Belonging Co conference I went to. He said this a couple times. I was like, that's good. He said cynicism is not a fruit of the Spirit. And I just, I was like, man, I don't ever want to let that fruit grow in me.
Yeah. Well, I think cynicism is the uber negative attitude that, you know, I don't necessarily connect cynicism with skepticism.
But I feel like the first gut level response could be the same. I think cynicism would be like, wait, really? Why? Like,
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Like I want to find that place where I just don't ever let. It's probably the Message paraphrase of some verse I love Jesus says. He says, "Don't let your eyes become dark with cynicism."
That's definitely a Message paraphrase.
It's definitely
not in the NIV or NLT or.
But so I don't know if any of that rambling makes sense. I just on a personal level. Was it the C.S. Lewis quote? You know me, I love quotes. He said, talking about love and relationships. He says, you can choose never to love. And it's this famous, you see this quote now everywhere. And you can put your heart in a casket and it won't be broken.
Right.
But in that casket, it'll become dark, cold, still, motionless.
Sure.
And I think it's the older you get especially, it's fighting to keep a childlike hope and belief alive in you, while also letting wisdom mature. And I do think there's a difference between, we can call it discernment. There is such a thing as pattern detection.
Right.
You know, you and I have been in church long enough to where you meet certain people, you see certain things, and you're like, pattern detection.
Right.
And I think it's okay to have that as long as the pattern detection doesn't become pervasive.
Sure.
And detrimental.
Yes.
And so I don't know if any of that's helpful, but yeah.
Are you trusting in relationships? Are you more trusting? I think what you're saying. I think there's a bottom level of skepticism that leans towards cynicism that I think can be very unhealthy. Yeah. And so that's the piece that we're talking about. Like, I think we don't want that to be. And that's where I think having faith really begins to alter how you view reality.
Right.
Without ignoring facts, without ignoring that, it gives you a different picture of reality that can't be always detected by the five senses. Is that a good way of saying it?
Yeah. Well, you psychoanalyze me then. Am
well,
I trusting?
no, but you didn't answer the question. So I was going to give you a chance to answer the question, but I'm just saying, I'm saying we all, let's look at it like there's a spectrum. And, I think, if you go to the bottom of one end of the spectrum, it's cynicism, it's dark, it's overtly negative.
Right.
It's, I can't trust anybody, right? That's the one end. The far end of the other side of the spectrum is maybe where you would put gullible. You would say it's the person who just believes what everybody tells them, anybody tells them.
Yep.
It's kind of like that Proverbs, like the first person talks and sounds convincing until cross-examined.
Yep.
Right? So there's some people, I think, and we're all probably somewhere on this spectrum, and I think faith pulls you in one direction.
Yeah.
I think experiences and disappointments and other things can pull you in the other direction.
Sure.
So I do feel like we're always kind of moving along this spectrum. Like you even said, faith experiences can.
Sure.
You have a bad faith or church experience, you're going to probably project that on other people that say they have a faith. You're probably going to project that on God. You're going to, there's a lot of this is deep waters that we're getting into human psychology and all the other elements. So we're just trying to play around in an idea for us to be able to kind of look at ourselves and just kind of say, hey, where am I in this spectrum? And I think we're always moving in different aspects. So when it comes to interpersonal relationships, where do you land?
What do you think? You had me answer for you first.
Yeah, but I said what I thought I was. So I don't want to say you're not. If that's what you feel about yourself.
I think I'm trusting.
And I think that's also kind of a loaded and probably an overly simplistic question to say, how are you in interpersonal relationships, right? Because, there's some I will say this. I probably have been this is bad. These are the kind of things where I think you always have to kind of guard your heart and investigate your heart.
Yeah.
I would say I, for the most part, have been easily trusting of people in the church world, and doing this for over 20 years. You meet a lot of people.
Yeah.
You kind of take people at face value. You kind of assume, it's only once you've been betrayed that all of a sudden you start to become more cynical or skeptical of people. You know what I mean? Like I think by default, we as humans are probably more trusting than skeptical. I do think. I just think by default. I think kids, the kids that I know of, and if they're growing up in a healthy, like they're hopeful. They have a vivid imagination. Where does that come? Like we just dream, we imagine, we think anything's possible. There's that. And which is interesting. Like you said before, one of the things they've done in studying is that really young kids, a significant number of young kids can measure it the genius level. So life beats it out of us.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? We were talking about intelligence and optimism and all that kind of stuff. Kids are massively optimistic about life. What are you going to be one day? I'm going to go to the moon. I'm going to be an astronaut. I'm going to be this, right? And then they get into 6th grade science and it's terrible. And they're like, okay, forget that, right? So I do think that it changes with time and experience. And so I guess let me ask you this. You'd say you're more trusting. Where's your default? And I believe that about you. And you can be trusting with discernment. So let's just say that. There's I think we learn when we've been around some people, it's like, don't trust them, right? That doesn't necessarily mean you're not a trusting person in general. I think somebody who is not trusting by default, and maybe that happens because of experiences, probably tend to be lonelier, probably don't have a lot of friends, probably don't have a lot of connections. They probably tend to pull back and retract into their own world because they don't trust people. And I think that's a sad, I think if you're that way, I don't think anybody really wants to be there. I think things have happened. Things have happened to you. But, I guess what I was curious of what your thoughts of how this has impacted you, where I will say that maybe we'll all start off this way. I've been more trusting, probably become more reserved over the years by the amount of times you get hurt or betrayed. And let's put it this way. There's church hurt. And whenever we hear those phrases, and I love what Erwin made, that clip that was going around. He's like, I don't believe there's church hurt. I believe there's human hurt, right?
Yeah.
And I agree with that. But I understand how sometimes people look at organizationally or whatever. So let's just, we all understand what it is. I want to say it this way. There are people who have experienced church hurt because they've been hurt in a church or maybe I would say, I hate to just use this term because I think there's a little bit of difference between being hurt in a community of church and being hurt by an authority figure of the church. I think there's a little bit of a difference. But there's that. I want to go so far as to say there's also church hurt the other way, which is there's also every pastor or leader you meet, I promise you, has been hurt probably more times than you've been hurt in a church experience.
Yeah, it's so interesting.
Is that fair to say? I'm just saying the amount of people that have left, have made accusations, have said things about you that was not your motive or intent, that have, you know what I mean, have gotten mad, has probably, I'm just saying for those who say I've been hurt by church, every church leader has been hurt too.
I just think I don't want to say funny, but I kind of want to just say the funny but sad reality is we go to our corners where everybody's been hurt the way we've been hurt.
Yeah.
So people, whether it's just ex-evangelicals or deconstructionists or people that just walk away from the church, walk away and they find their corners of how do you ever trust a church again when this leader did this person did this, and I don't minimize any of that.
Yeah.
And then it's funny. I go to this conference in Nashville, which is an open conference to anybody, but you can tell it's mainly church leaders.
Yeah.
And session after session and breakout after breakout is, pastors, remember, I know that you've been betrayed 1,000 times. I know you poured into people for years and then they just left without a conversation.
Yep.
I know you showed up for their funeral and you showed up at the hospital and you prayed for them and you preached your heart out and they just turned their back on you anyways. I know that people misunderstood you during COVID and left without a conversation. Yep. I know blah, 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 but you can't stop. And it's like, and when can we just accept the fact that we're all just pretty broken?
Yeah.
And we all just need community even though we get hurt in community.
Yep.
And I will say maybe it's semantics, but one thing that came to my mind that I don't know if this is helpful, but this whole thing of like trust just on a very practical, relational level, and especially I think with church, maybe this could help, is the thought came to my mind, there is a difference between trusting and putting your trust in. Because if we're going to live a meaningful life and have vibrant relationships, we have to choose, no matter how many times we've been hurt, to choose to trust. But that doesn't mean you put your trust in.
Yeah.
What do I mean by that?
Yep.
That means if I go to church, let's say I'm brand new today, I can choose, no matter how many times I've been hurt, to say, Pastor Tim, I'm going to choose to extend trust first.
Right.
To choose to have the charitable assumption about your character and who you are until you prove otherwise.
Yep.
Or the truth is you're human, so there's going to be something.
Right.
But I can choose to do that. But I can do that without putting my trust in you.
Right.
If you're listening to this and you're part of your faith community, for me, I hope that there's something in me that you can trust.
Right.
That I hope that you, but I want to plead with you. Please don't ever put your trust in me.
Yeah.
Because I will let you down. And I'm going to screw up, and I've screwed up, and I'll continue to mess up, and I'm human. And so I just think, I think that's actually a healthy place we can get to.
Yeah.
Where we can choose to extend trust without putting our trust in that.
Yes.
I can say, I'm going to choose to trust that Pastor Tim is a person of integrity, but even if he were to fail, my trust is not in him. My trust is in God speaking through him. My trust is in the fact that this community is something beautiful and organic that's happening, whether you're perfect or not.
Or whether I'm here.
Or whether you're here or not.
Right.
Because, and I just think if we can find that place of tension, because the truth is, I've probably mentioned it before, but the first ever conference I went to, I think it was a YS conference or Catalyst like 15, 20 years ago, Andy Stanley spoke. And on an organizational level, he did this thing. You ever see him do the thing with the blocks?
Nope.
He said, here's the blocks. He said, and here is like you and this person, here's the organization, and you take this block of trust away. He said, when the block of trust is removed, here's what happens. Somebody shows up late. Oh, my gosh. They're late again. Right. Oh, my gosh. And you've chosen to trust last.
Mm-hmm.
He said, and that's where disunity happens. That's where cultures break down. He said a trust first thing where that block is somebody's like, man, you know what? I'm sure there must be something going on.
Right.
I'm choosing to trust first. Later on, I'm going to ask them, hey, are you okay? Everything going on okay? If that person repeatedly breaks that trust and the block of trust is removed, that's when I go to that person and just say, hey, I'm feeling, and I just explain that to him. He's like, can you imagine if we all cultivated trust first cultures in our relationships, in our organization? You could feel the room. Like, it was almost like healing was happening at even the possibility. What would it look like to work in a place like that?
Yeah.
Where trust was first.
Yeah.
Where if I'm not in the room, people are trusting the best of my motives,
the
best of my intentions. And he made a statement, and I think it's so true. Maybe it's just good for this conversation. He said, trusting is risky. Mm-hmm. Not trusting is riskier.
I like it.
And I think that's true in our relationships, our organizations, our health, everything.
Are there people you trust in? Because I think it's just to say, I agree with the sentiment, and I don't want anybody to do that. But I think the closer you get to people, the more you actually have trust in them. And those are probably the situations where you end up getting hurt the most.
Yeah.
Not just I trust that person as this. It's the people you really do trust in them for, not to be God, but
maybe this is a better way to put it. It's where you place your trust, and it's what you're trusting them for.
Yeah.
So yes, naturally as you get closer to people, I have trust in them.
Yeah.
That they have my back.
Yeah.
I have trust in them for my loyalty.
Yeah.
And that's just, and if that trust is broken, it's painful.
Yep.
There's no sugarcoating that.
Yep.
I think probably I was more speaking to is my commitment to the local church or my belief in God.
No, I understand that concept. Because
a lot of people do that.
Yeah.
A lot of, so many people, a leader lets them down and church hurts them and they bail.
Yeah.
And while I never want to minimize the pain of that, this is probably the simple faith in me. Mm-hmm. When I fell in love with Jesus, to me, being a part of his body, I was taught was not optional. Mm-hmm. So I think maybe I just, of all that I've gotten wrong, I think by the grace of God, I got the vertical part right of going to church. Yes, it's awesome. Yep. Community's awesome. Yes, hearing the word's awesome. But I'm going more for the vertical. This is something that Jesus implemented. Sure. And he didn't really give me an option of, hey, if it goes well, then do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and just on a psychological level, we need each other. Just on a, I mean, again, take faith out of it. Community. That I've heard atheists talk about. Atheists are horrible at community.
Yeah.
Like, if nothing else but for the psychological health. It's been said before, you're hurt in community, but you're healed in community.
Yeah. That's true.
Yeah.
That's good. No, I think you make some great points, and I think wherever people are on this kind of spectrum, I think it's good to reflect, because sometimes maybe we ignore past experiences and other things that have kind of creeped in and can cause us, I think at the end of the day, I don't want to be a negative person. I'm not a negative person. I think you can be, I think you can be questioning without being negative. I think you can, rationalize stuff and do all that. That's all fine and good. I don't think there's anything wrong with doing any of that stuff. But I do think, like, I want my bent to be toward believing or trusting people, situations. And I think that's getting, I guess part of what I was probably thinking of when I originally, is just, it's getting so hard to do today.
Yeah.
I don't know who to believe. I mean, you pick a different TV network.
Yeah.
And you have a completely different narrative.
Yes. Yep.
Of what any of our current candidates and leaders look like.
Yep.
I mean, completely different.
Yep. Oh, yeah.
And so I think that's the danger of maybe where we're going as a society. I know you said selective trust, and I agree, but I think there's even it's like this idea that, again, everything just keeps getting spun. So it's like TikTok and influencers, and you see all this and are like, oh, this is where everybody gets their news and their information and get all this stuff today. And then you come out here and you're like, yeah, China owns the platform and they could be using it to to do things. And then you're like, okay, I can't trust the people that, and it is interesting. I think this is why we're seeing a spin off of mainstream media to the Joe Rogans and the Jordan Peterson and the other people who are finding other avenues. where, I mean,
Yep.
there are more people who listen to Joe Rogan than listen to any mainstream journalist today.
Yep.
By a lot.
And the mainstream journalists are mad about it. And it's like, okay, well, number one, platforms change every few decades.
Yeah.
Especially now, it's probably going to be even more. But number two, if you want to have the influence that Joe Rogan has, then get back to journalism.
Well, I don't even know if Joe Rogan. Well, here's the interesting thing.
And he's not
Joe
even a
Rogan's
journalist.
Not a journalist.
But
He's kind of pretty real and raw and authentic.
But he asks honest questions,
transparency.
and he's not beholden to an obvious agenda.
Yeah. I think that's it. I think there's agendas behind it, and everybody has seen. And all the cards are on the table now.
Yeah.
I mean, we saw them through lawsuits and other things. We know where Fox is. We know where CNN is, MSNBC. Like, it is all on the table. So now everybody just kind of retreats to their own little chambers. And now, and it's just, I think about political environment, how we are just so distrusting of even the person sitting across the table. We're distrusting of the person who votes different. We're distrusting of that person. And I think that's kind of a sad state of where we are. And so I think the whole thought of this is kind of for us to kind of internalize a little bit. Am I more trusting? Am I more skeptical? And it's probably different in different arenas. And why?
Yeah.
Why am I like that?
Right.
And, you know, I don't know. I don't know that I have an answer. It was just kind of one of those things that I just was processing a little bit of like, okay, what am I like? And where do I fall on this? Is that different in different arenas? And like I think you can't be happy in life I don't think you can be happy in life if you're skeptical of everything and everybody. Yeah. I just don't think you will be.
Yeah.
I think if everything is a lie and everything's out to get you and no one can be trusted, I think you're going to be alone. You're going to be miserable. You're going to not enjoy life.
Yep. And I'm just going to go back to what we said at the beginning. Don't blame it on reason and intellect. Because, again, there's a higher link between optimism and intelligence. And that could be cyclical. It is very possible that when I choose to restrict my soul and to shut down and to close off my heart, really. Because when you close off your mind, you also close off your heart. That when I do that, I'm becoming rigid in my thinking.
Yeah.
And I'm actually, while I think I'm being more analytical, I'm actually becoming more limited.
I think there are a lot of scientists out there who would disagree with you. But that's what's interesting about it, that field. I'm just thinking about people who are very, very, like, in that field.
Yeah.
And it is. I mean, it's...
Yeah, well, I'm going to quote somebody we both know. If you look at things from a purely present scientific standpoint, the facts may be for you, but the future isn't. And in every generation, the really practical people who just looked at present data would have said, you're going to fly one day. Oh, you're going to have a vaccine one day. Oh, you're going to go to the moon one day. Yeah, you need to look at data. You need to look at facts.
Are we sure the moon landing happened?
Speaking of trust.
Speaking of not trusting, I just saw something. Again, we'll end with this. This is kind of funny. But I saw something, again, this is when you start seeing there's so much out there, you don't even know what to trust when they do it. But it was somebody that took all the details, the footage or whatever, and they had AI review it again, and AI came out and said from all the data and certain things that it was like it was a very high percentage of chance that was staged. I'm kidding. I don't believe it. I'm just telling you this is what it did, and it took. They compared it to images and footage, which again are going to be completely different in the 60s versus a few months ago. I think it was a few months ago, weeks ago, whatever, when China had a landing on the moon or did something. I don't remember when it was. And they said that was like 100% probability of that being accurate. And when they reviewed it, and it was like, oh, that's interesting. Speaking of which, and I'm not a conspiracy. I'm less conspiracy theorist than I would say you might be.
But I'm not at all.
You're not at all?
No. I was actually going to say that's one of the places I'm probably very selective, trust is like, which I don't know if you say that's trust towards one way or the other, but like, I tend to be very skeptical towards conspiracy theorists.
Well, I think people who are big conspiracy theorists are very skeptical toward government and institution.
Very
so
true.
I think they kind of play on both. Whereas maybe you aren't as skeptical toward government. I think you think that people who lead government stuff. I mean, I think you probably would be the person that gives benefit of the doubt quicker. Not saying then just anybody, but you would do that maybe even regardless of their affiliation. Like, they're Republican, because if everybody's a Republican is convinced that everybody's a Democrat,
right,
is kind of lying and all this. Everybody's a Democrat is convinced every Republican is corrupt. You know what I mean? So they kind of go hand in hand.
Yeah, when it comes, I'll be clear. When it comes to U.S. politicians and our U.S. government, I completely assume that there's a lot of corruption.
Yeah.
I completely assume there's a lot of lying. I completely assume there's a lot of cover-up. I don't go to the leaps to always buy into deep state.
Yeah.
And to always buy into everybody, even transnationally, is into some Kabbalah or some Satan worship or some that's where I'm different. I assume in the same way that there are corrupt law enforcement and corrupt doctors and teachers and everything else, especially in Washington. Let's be honest, when you get into power, when you get into the political games that have to be played, and the different
greed.
Yes, I assume all that's there. I also assume in this fragile thing of democracy that there is a decent system of checks and balances for mass corruption, and that it's why every 4 years we tend to course correct back and forth.
Sure, there's no deep state.
Not sure, but
Tulsi Gabbard seemed to allude to the fact that there was on the Democrat side when she switched sides. Did you notice that? I don't know if you noticed that.
Yeah,
that was one of the things that she said. I'm not saying agree or believe. I'm just saying one of the things she said when she switched over basically was that the people and whoever's in office and running for office is a pawn, and that there's actually this group of people that actually control it all, which sounded very much deep state-esque. Yeah. And that is one of the things that Republicans say, I don't know about any of that stuff. This is where sometimes I get to the point when I go, I just don't care anymore.
So you know what we may have? Now we're going to cause controversy again. Here's what we may have. We may have a deep state in the Democratic Party that underground controls the entire system. And then on the right, we have an above ground deep state where Trump controls the entire system.
Well, here's the thing he said, though. I was pretty interesting.
Maybe one's just out in the open.
But he said that regardless of what happens at this one, if he does not win, he's not going to run again. He said that. Pretty clearly.
He's also 80.
He's 78.
Yeah.
Right? And so he'd be 82 or 83 probably even. So I think but that was interesting. He did say, so either way, the end of this year, or we're going to know kind of where we're headed for the next 4 years in that regard, and which deep state alliance is running our country. Man, we might be so naive to it all.
Sure.
Sometimes it's okay to be naive. It's like that whole thing. Sometimes it's good ignorance is bliss.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just good to be ignorant. And that's what everybody who's a conspiracy theorist thinks about everybody who doesn't believe it.
You sheeple.
Yeah.
You
so you know what? That's okay.
Yeah.
I don't bind a lot of them. But anyways, I don't know if it was helpful or just an interesting conversation. I don't know where people fall in that. But that was just something for us to
I think it was a great topic.
Dialogue through.
Let us know. Are you an optimist or pessimist?
Or realist.
See,
I consider myself a realist, not a pessimist.
Pessimist.
Is that no? Can I be a realist and an optimist?
I think
there's a lot of things I'm an optimist
is a pessimist in disguise or denial.
I don't agree.
Okay.
We disagree.
Says the
we can
realist.
agree to disagree. We can agree to disagree.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, hey, let us know how you enjoyed this episode. Write in to the podcastthex.church. And until next week, share this with somebody if you found it interesting.
Share this with somebody who's involved in deep fake stuff, on political level.
Yeah, that, or if they just want to have a conversation on trust. And until then, we will see you next week.
Hey guys, it's Russ. Thanks so much for listening. We really believe if we can get around tables instead of behind screens, if we can talk to each other instead of at each other, we can make the world better. To help us do that, here are a few things you can do to help. First, if you haven't yet, leave a review on Apple or Spotify and hit subscribe on YouTube. This helps more than you know. Also, if you have been impacted by the community out of which this podcast comes, that's X Church. Maybe you're local or you've been touched by the messages and impact across the country, even the world. I want to encourage you to support this work. A powerful life principle is to invest in the people and places that invest in you. And so I want to invite you to do that right now by going to thex.church/give. You can give a one-time small gift, a sacrificial gift, or even become a recurring partner. Together, let's keep elevating the conversation, thinking higher, loving deeper, and making the world better. Cheers.